So yeah, you have some
some research and stats. Yeah. So it's interesting. The study from 2017 about romantic relationships and mental health. So, we talked about our own examples of workplace toxicity, which there's some stats on that as well. But I guess I started off with romantic, so let's talk about that. In 2017, this study showed that greater mental health predicts entry into romantic relationships. And so, and then also, basically, if you feel well and your mental health is better, then it helps you be in maybe better romantic relationships or perhaps less toxic. And I think the most important part, though, is that improving your relationship. So I think that not necessarily being in toxicity benefits your individual mental health. And so I would say that, if you're in a toxic romantic relationship, that's probably one of the most significant relationships that you can decide to be in. And, if you have an improving or a good relationship, it maybe helps with your mental health. If you don't, then it may not be so helpful.
Yeah. And it sounds like maybe the current state you're in, and maybe you're in that state for various reasons, or it's really just your way of being due to past experiences, trauma, and so now you're attaching to what's familiar to you. But whatever your current state is, maybe if it's not this ideal and authentic state you want to be in, but a state where you're struggling, maybe then you're more prone to enter into these toxic relationships and situations.
Yeah, I think that might be,
Reminds me too of our sense of worth and value. I think there's a lot of layers maybe to why people stay in situations when they're aware that this isn't ideal. So there's so many other reasons why. I think one, though, sometimes is that worth and value of you're at this certain spot and space in your life. Maybe you're feeling a lot of feelings of depression and stuff. And so it's very hard to navigate that, right? Or knowing that, this is maybe toxic and maybe this is just what I deserve. Maybe this is just what love is, because my past 5 relationships have been this, and my relationship with my parents were very similar. I mean, so maybe this is what it is for me. And so I think accounting for that too, when it comes to relationships.
I think so too. For another study, this is going back to what we were talking about, which is workplace. There was a Workforce Institute did a survey of over 3,000 people in 10 different countries, including the US and other countries. It very, very important stuff. So it found that 60% of employees worldwide say that their job is the biggest factor influencing their mental health. Specifically, managers have just as much of an impact on people's mental health as their spouse. And they have even more impact on their mental health more than their doctor or their therapist. And so I think that is so significant, because if you're in a toxic work environment, it is extremely impactful.
No, definitely.
And your manager is as important as the spouse that you choose, and more important than your doctor or therapist.
And what's most difficult, which I think leads to that high stat and the feelings of toxicity, we can't control our manager. You go into these new job settings and stuff, you're just hoping that, I hope my supervisor is good. But it can be a deal breaker, right? It's a make or break for your experience. So, but at least as a therapist, you can choose a romantic partner. You can choose more times than not. So, but the manager, it's you don't get to choose that. You don't know what you're walking into. And yes, a lot of people's workplaces are extremely stressful, toxic, all these different dynamics going on. And I think why it's so impactful is most people are spending more time at work than they are at home. And so we need that space to be ideal. Unfortunately, for over 60% of people, it's just not.
Yeah. And it's crazy because I think I just said, I think, your romantic partner is one of the most important relationships that you can choose, that you have. And it also sounds like your manager is one of the most important relationships that you can have. And you really don't always have that much choice over it.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, I think the significance is that for many people, like most of us aren't walking around and have, you know, we have to work. And so I think that maybe what adds to all of the stress of being in a toxic work environment is if the choice to leave isn't, you know, that readily available to you. Even if you have a choice to leave, like in my situation, I didn't have to stay in a job, and I ultimately did, but I couldn't like impulsively just walk off and say I'm done. You know, I had to be methodical about it. I had to think, you know what I mean? I had to plan for it. And I think for many people, that is the case.
Yeah, no, definitely. That is a difficult part when it's not a choice for a lot of people. It's not just as easy as, okay, just leave that situation. And this is, again, for work, but like I mentioned before, even relationships and things like that. Family is a big one. Like, I mean, some people do cut off their families,
but for many people, that's a hard choice and not a choice that they're, you know, willing or able to make. Like, you know, cutting off a sibling or a parent or a grandparent or, you know, an uncle, like those are really, that's a really extreme measure for some people. And that's not something that many people are willing to do. And so then, you know, I guess my question is, so then what do we do? You know, how do we heal from toxic relationships? What do we do about them? And I mean, relationships with any of the things that we've talked about.
And it sounds like, since we were kind of discussing that control aspect, one part would be trying to figure out what this control looks like for you in this situation. So if it's relationship, work, family, first having to ask yourself, like, what control do I have in this situation? If it's work, okay, do I have the control and feasibility and power to just leave? Some people, it's like, yeah, go apply for something else. Right now, it's just fear in the way. Like, go do it. Some of us, it's like, I really don't have time to try to like find a new thing, build up. Like maybe you've worked really hard to get where you're at. Or just for survival and financial reasons, you just need it. Right? And so one, I think, deciphering what control you have in it. And then maybe that leads to the next actions after that. The next thing, and this doesn't have to be the exact order, but the next thing that kind of comes to mind is trying to gain some type of support around this. If you feel you have control or if you don't. But whatever the answer is for the control, is there some support that would help you either gain more control or just help you with that situation? Right? And maybe that's when like therapy or someone comes in, but maybe it's just some other sources of support.
And I think like if you have support, like for a job, for example, if you have other people in the work environment that you do find supportive and trustworthy and non-toxic, sometimes that can be really helpful. You know, and sometimes it's not available or sometimes it's not. But, you know, I think in my own situations, some of the work environments that I had that were toxic, like I also had some amazing, amazing coworkers. And I'm like, they should just let us run this place. And it was these relationships that kind of kept me going just a little bit longer, you know, just a little bit more. Or maybe I actually had a really good boss, even though the environment and admin was toxic, but like that boss was maybe protective. You know, and in one case, I had a really great boss and that person was actually pretty protective while they were there. And that was a nice buffer. So that, I think, even if you don't have supports in the environment, definitely having supports outside of the environment can be helpful. You know, having folks that you love and care about and can talk to about this. And I think, you know, thinking about one of the environments, one of my bosses that was really helpful, one of the things this person said to me, because I was, you know, like, I really wanted to leave, like I just couldn't. And I like had an honest conversation with this person about it. And what I found to be helpful was a mental shift. And this person was like, you know, sometimes people have to be what we were talking about, like in the job, because they like people are, let me say it differently. People are in a job for many different reasons. And so, you know, for some people, it's because it's their passion, you know, it's their purpose. They really love this job, right? But for many people, that's actually not the case. For some people, it's financial. For other people, it might be because this is a flexible schedule. And so this works better for me. Maybe I have a family, maybe I have kids, and this job environment is better for me. And so for whatever the reason is, like, be clear about what your reason is. And it's okay if you choose to stay here because the reasons that you're here kind of trump the experience of it, at least right now.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of helped me mentally just stay on the little bit longer that I needed to stay on to move on to something else.
Mm-hmm.
That was really helpful. So like this mindset shift. And then I'll say one thing, be quiet because I'm talking, I'm on a run. The other thing was like being able to differentiate like my home life and my work life. I started to be very like clear and delineate the difference. And so I didn't want no phone calls from work. I wasn't reading emails from work, didn't have it on my computer. When I was at work, but when I was at home, I was very much at home, and there was no need for me to kind of like include work into my space.
Yeah. So if you are within some toxic situation, figuring out if you feel maybe you don't have a huge amount of control, finding those areas where you maybe have a little bit of control to have some type of like boundaries or shifts or something, it sounds like.
I love that point about what you do have control over, because there also might be some areas of control that you actually have in your work environment. Maybe this person is like, maybe that's like a person that's like really, really toxic. So maybe you don't necessarily need to be around that person, or you limit being around that person, or limit some role if you have that available to you.
Yeah. And then I think of, the authenticity part, but then maybe touching on people healing from like past toxic situations. But I think with the authenticity, that's maybe a way to heal, because one, it's going to require that awareness. Like I said, a lot of us aren't even in tune with like, this maybe isn't the best situation for me. And that's where we need that authentic self to shine the most, to remind us that like, no, this isn't the right situation for you, and you deserve something different. Are you able to go get it or not? But I just want you to know, like, you deserve something different, and this isn't it. And so we really have to have that awareness and tap into like, does this even feel right for my authentic self? And I think the healing can always occur when you follow that authentic path that you have set for yourself. But I think what we see maybe even more commonly too is people still needing to heal from past toxic situations. It can be a relationship situation, circumstance you were in last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even childhood for some people, right? And some of that's just maybe trauma, and some is just like toxic things you had to deal with. So again, I think of that awareness piece, because you can't heal from it until you're aware of how it's continuing to impact you in present day. And again, that's sometimes difficult for us to be aware of like, I think this is still impacting me. I had a client, she was in a previous relationship with domestic violence, and so obviously a lot of trauma from that. So now her learning a lot from those situations and being very mindful going forward with dating, and it's kind of an act of avoidance, but I'm like, okay, do we need to do some trauma work, brain spotting around it? No, I think I'm good. So I'm like, okay, if you say so, I'm not going to push anyone. But knowing in the back of my head, I'm like, some of the things you're discussing, this fear of entering this relationship, this distrust you have for this person that hasn't shown you anything to be distrustful about, it sounds like things from your past relationship are lingering into this. But I just had to let her come to that on her own, right? And then one day she comes in and she's like, let's try that brain spotting thing, right? Because she realized, her current partner just lifted his arm to maybe reach in and get something, and she flinched, right? And so that was an indicator to her that like, maybe I'm not fully healed from that. And so I think people need to be aware of the impacts, because we start to project a lot of things onto maybe current relationships or people around us based off of times that we felt really bad in past situations, and so we haven't fully let go of that. So I think that would be a big piece of healing, is trying to acknowledge like what is still impacting me, and knowing that like, okay, that's maybe the area that I need to heal in. I still need to heal in this area of trust, or I still need to heal in this area of like safety, or like letting people in, being vulnerable, being authentic with someone else. So I think that would be important for those past
For
things.
sure. I
Yeah.
think so too.
Yeah.
Thanks for tapping in to All Things Authentic. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. For full episodes, find All Things Authentic on your favorite podcast listening platform.